I said those words softly to my 8-year-old son as he clung to my side, sobbing harder than I'd ever seen. His tiny body trembled as I crouched beside him in our dimly lit hallway. I had just finished telling him that Daddy wouldn't be living with us anymore. He didn't ask why, he didn't have to. The signs had been there for months. My husband, Eric, had grown distant, quieter. He came home later, claimed exhaustion, and tucked himself away in the office with the door locked. At first, I thought it was stress from work, but the truth was something else entirely, and far more painful. It wasn't a physical affair, not at first. That's what made it harder to see. He had met her, Meyer, at his company's leadership retreat in Colorado. She was a consultant, smart and confident, the kind of woman who listens with her whole body. I only learned her name months later when I saw the messages. They didn't talk about sex. They talked about fear, dreams, and how disconnected they felt from their own partners. They shared playlists, inside jokes. He once told her, "You make me feel understood in a way I forgot was possible." That line broke me when I confronted him. Eric didn't deny it. His voice cracked when he said, "I didn't mean for it to happen. I just needed someone." I wanted to scream. I was his someone, or at least I used to be. He moved out a week later, temporarily, he said. But that kind of emotional intimacy doesn't vanish overnight, and neither does the betrayal. I remember standing in the kitchen days after, staring at the coffee pot. I couldn't make coffee anymore. That was our ritual. He'd make it too strong, I'd water it down. Silly, small things suddenly meant too much. For weeks, I swung between rage and aching sadness. Therapy helped, but it also made me realize that I hadn't been emotionally present either. We were coexisting, parenting, planning, but not connecting. I never expected my son's meltdown to hit me the hardest. That night in the hallway, I saw not just his heartbreak, but the reflection of my own. And yet, healing began slowly. Eric and I started parenting with grace. We no longer yelled. We no longer tried to fix anything. Just honest, raw conversations when needed. He told me he cut things off with Maya weeks after leaving. Not because he wanted to come back, but because he realized he was looking for escape, not truth. We're not back together. Maybe we never will be. But one thing is certain. The affair changed everything. Not just between him and me, but in how I now define love, loyalty, and the quiet power of emotional presence. Not all relationships survive betrayal, but some truths, as brutal as they are, wake you up to the things you were asleep to all along. It started so quietly that I didn't even notice. Or maybe I didn't want to notice. Emotional distance doesn't come crashing down like a chandelier, it creeps in like fog. A few less "how was your day" questions, longer silences over dinner, laughter that stopped landing. I used to know the rhythm of Eric's breathing when he fell asleep. At some point, I stopped recognizing even that. You tell yourself these things are normal, you blame work, kids, exhaustion, and you keep going because the idea of stopping, of asking why, feels more terrifying than the drift itself. Looking back now, I remember the first shift. It wasn't sex. It was a text I saw pop up on his phone. "That story you told me stayed with me all day. You're such a rare soul." My stomach tightened, not because it was flirtatious, but because it wasn't. It was something else, deeper. That message said something I hadn't said to him in years. And I realized I hadn't heard words like that from him either. That's what people don't talk about when they talk about affairs. They think it's about desire or forbidden thrill or ego, but sometimes it's about loneliness, not the kind you feel when you're alone, but the kind that stares back at you even when you're sitting side by side, married, sharing a bed, and somehow more distant than ever. When Eric told me later, after the confrontation, after I finally pressed him, he didn't even defend himself. He just looked tired, defeated. He said, "It felt like she saw me, like really saw me. I didn't expect that." And as much as I wanted to rage at him, part of me knew exactly what he meant. I had once been that person for him, and now someone else had stepped into that role quietly and dangerously. The connection he formed with Maya wasn't made in a bedroom. It was made in late-night voice notes, in shared vulnerability, in confessions about growing older and feeling invisible. It was made in their ability to make each other feel like they mattered. When someone understands the parts of you that your partner doesn't even ask about anymore, it feels like a rescue. And once you feel that, going back to emotional silence feels suffocating, and here's the cruelest part. It's possible to love someone and still feel more emotionally bonded to someone else. That's what destroyed me. Eric didn't stop loving me, not really. But his emotional loyalty had drifted, his instinct to share his pain, his joy, his secrets. It no longer pointed toward home, it pointed toward her. I found a note in his drawer after he moved out. He never meant for me to see it. It read, "I know this connection can't be real, but it feels like the most honest thing in my life." I cried holding that note, not because he had lied, but because he had told someone else the truth. That was the real betrayal, and the thing is, I wasn't blameless. I had numbed myself to the emotional erosion too. I brushed off his silences, chose practical over passion, prioritized schedules over connection. I didn't ask how he was really doing. I didn't notice how often he looked like he wanted to talk and just didn't. So when Maya listened, really listened, I lost something I hadn't protected in years. That's what people need to understand. Emotional attachment isn't fragile because it's weak. It's fragile because it's quiet, it grows, or dies. In the unsaid, in the overlooked, in the accumulation of small dismissals and missed chances to truly connect. And once it shifts toward someone else, it changes everything, whether physical lines are crossed or not. What followed next was the consequence of that emotional disloyalty. It was the secrets, the late night calls, the rewriting of truths, and the unbearable moment when I discovered just how much of his world I no longer belonged to. He said he was staying late to help prep for a product pitch, said the client was in Tokyo, so calls had to happen at odd hours. I remember nodding, not questioning it. That was the thing. We had stopped questioning each other, not out of trust, but fatigue. We weren't curious anymore. When he came home late, I just went to bed. And when he finally climbed in next to me, I didn't ask how it went. He didn't offer. We lay there like two actors playing spouses in a drama we both stopped watching years ago. The truth, of course, was buried beneath layers of quiet choices. A glass of wine while texting her from his office. Lunches that turned into hours of walking in parks neither of us had visited in years. Secrets tucked between conference calls and calendar invites. At first, I didn't want to believe he'd crossed into an affair. I told myself it was just an emotional thing, a phase, something to talk through in therapy, but secrets don't live in isolation. They demand expansion. I didn't find out from a text or a call. I found out when I came home early from my sister's house and heard his voice in the kitchen, soft, laughing, intimate, the kind of tone he hadn't used with me in a long time. I stood there in the hallway and listened to him say, "It's different with you. It feels lighter, honest." It shattered something in me I didn't even know was still intact. When he hung up and saw me, it was like the air was sucked out of the room. His face drained of color, and for a full 10 seconds, neither of us spoke. The silence was louder than any screaming could have been. He opened his mouth to say something, but I walked past him, straight to the bedroom. I locked the door and sat on the floor with my back against it like a child trying to keep the monster out. I didn't cry, not then. I just sat in stunned stillness, the kind that comes when the reality you've clung to suddenly crumbles. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't look him in the eye. I didn't want to hear explanations. I didn't want to know how long it had been or if he loved her. I was afraid the answers would hurt more than the silence. But silence has a way of making you sick. It festers. Every shared moment becomes a lie. Every compliment in retrospect feels rehearsed. Every memory now carries the aftertaste of deception. And the worst part wasn't even the affair. It was realizing that I hadn't been chosen in a long time, not for conversations, not for comfort, not for truth. He tried to talk, said he never meant for things to go that far. Said it started with friendship, then late, night venting, and somehow, one day, they were emotionally naked with each other. I hated that phrase, emotionally naked. It felt more violating than sex. I could forgive a body's weakness, maybe. But not a heart's betrayal. I kept imagining them talking, on a bench, on a call, laughing at jokes only they understood. I imagined him sharing memories with her that belonged to us, telling her the things he never told me. I imagined how free he must have felt with her, unburdened, seen, and then I'd look at myself in the mirror and wonder when I became so hard to look at. When had I stopped being someone he could talk to? Our son started noticing the tension. He asked why Daddy slept on the couch, why Mommy didn't laugh anymore. I told him we were just tired, that grown-ups get tired sometimes. I hated lying to him. But how do you explain emotional betrayal to a child who thinks love is forever if it starts with a wedding? When I finally told Eric to leave, it wasn't out of anger, it was clarity. The kind that comes when secrets have taken up too much space. The house felt poisoned by them. I needed to breathe. He didn't fight it, just packed quietly and kissed our son good. Bye like it was a routine goodbye, not a rupture. In the weeks after, the silence in the house changed. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was empty, yes, but honest. I'd rather live in truth, even when it hurts, than in the shadow of someone else's secret world